Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Something flashed in Mr. Riddle Sr.'s eyes as he looked at the closed door and thought of what Carl had just said. He then turned to look at his son, who was shouting. There was no trace of sympathy on his face. As he should, he said coldly. Would he be threatened by Nicole's friend if he shut his mouth from the start? That friend of hers is not an ordinary person. It was expected that Dylan would be afraid of her. But how did she meet such a person? Mr. Riddle Sr. could not figure it out for the life of him. He then ignored Dylan, who was still complaining, and walked upstairs. Sean, Steve, come with me. As soon as Snow saw the three of them walk away, she hurriedly went to her father's side. She did not dare speak up for his father at that time. After all, her position in the Riddle family was at stake. Dylan was displeased when he grabbed Snow's hand for support. He was angry and embarrassed that he was scared of a foreigner. He then cursed and slowly walked up the stairs. Not long after, Dexter also turned to walk away. There was only Chloe and Damien left downstairs. Chloe looked at her father, who was deep in thought, and gave him a strange look. Dad, what are you thinking about? Damien raised his head and glanced at his daughter coldly. I'm thinking about what that guy said just now. Is he really that high up in the ranks? If that's the case, our family might be nothing in his eyes, he thought. Damien then looked at his daughter, who was full of curiosity. However, he did not want to disclose his thoughts to her. You should go apologize to your mother, Chloe. You've disappointed her. After saying that, Damien turned around and walked up the stairs. Chloe stood there in shock. Her nails dug deep into her palms. This was the first time she heard someone say the word disappointed to her. She could not allow it. The following day, Nicole woke up in her room. It was still dark when she opened her eyes. She then quickly washed up and went to school. Time was of the essence. Zeke was happily standing at the school field. He thought that this would be the first time Nicole was late. However, he soon saw Nicole's figure emerging from the early morning mist. Although it was still a little dark out, he could clearly recognize that cold face anywhere. Nicole did not care about Zeke's thoughts. She put her bag on the ground and looked at him with an unexplainable emotion in her eyes. I'm with you today, she said. Zeke looked at the girl warming up beside him, ready to start. He then quickly went on the track. What's going on? Nicole is running with me. He confidently ran behind Nicole because he had a few training days before this. However, it did not take long for Nicole to surpass him by 2 laps. Like a gust of wind, she ran past Zeke with ease. When he finally finished the 30 laps, he found Nicole practicing martial arts without any equipment. Her hands and feet were moving around elegantly. Zeke stood aside and watched. This is what I want to learn. Nicole was fast. While Zeke was still struggling, she was already at the end. Zeke, she said softly, keep doing the task I gave you, and when I get back, I will teach you actual martial arts. Zeke nodded, but he soon realized something was wrong. Wait, what do you mean? Where are you going, Nicole? By then, Nicole had already picked up her bag and walked away dignifiedly. I will call you. Zeke was stunned as he looked at her figure, walking away. Okay, he said gently with a faint smile. Nicole then walked into the school building and sat in her usual seat. She started to pack up her things as if she was going to leave. She frowned slightly when she noticed that everyone was staring at her. Bradley, sitting in the front row, turned to look at her and asked, Nicole, did you really win the gold medal in the math Olympiad? Oh, so it's because of this, Nicole thought. She nodded her head casually with no change in expression, packed her bags, and started to walk out of the classroom. As she walked out, Vivian stood up and stopped her. She could hardly hold back her resentment when she looked at Nicole's beautiful looks. I don't know how you charmed your way into getting Mr. Wyance and Mr. Ellison to back you up, and I don't know how you got first place, but the results of our monthly exam will be out today. Are you leaving because you feel guilty? Nicole stared at Vivian, who dared find fault in front of her. Step aside, she said. Vivian was shocked by the cold look in Nicole's eyes, but she did not stop. No, you're waiting here till the results are out. I want you to tell us how exactly you cheated in the math Olympiad. Voices began to sound in the class after everyone heard Vivian's words. Yeah. I saw Mr. Wyant's attitude change when he was with Nicole. What kind of relationship do they have? Didn't Nicole get a 0 during the previous math Olympiad? How did she win first place this time? That's right. She knew that the results for the monthly exam would come out today, but she was trying to run away. She must be guilty. Vivian was satisfied when she heard people questioning Nicole's credibility. However, she still did not dare look her in the eyes. Vivian stared at the lower half of Nicole's face and said, "Just wait for the monthly exam results to come out, Nicole." Just when she was acting so arrogantly, a sneer came from behind. No matter what, Nicole has won an honor for our class. Before this, Northern Institute always won first place in the math Olympiad. Now that Nicole has beat them, not only are you all not proud of her, but you're also coming up with conspiracy theories and saying that she cheated, Jack said as he lazily leaned back. The class turned red when they heard those words. Yeah. Do all of you not know how smart Nicole is? She can solve those low-level math questions at a glance. That's why she got 0 on the previous math Olympiad. She was too lazy to write down the steps. Lulu added. Those who are blinded by their ego do not deserve to see beauty in this world, June said. Bradley then stood up and walked to Lulu's side. They're right. As a committee member, he was not very good at talking. However, he used his loud voice to defend Nicole. Warmth spread in Nicole's eyes when she looked at the people in front of her. Suddenly, a somewhat embarrassed voice sounded, I'm sorry, Nicole. The students glanced around and were shocked when they found out that the voice belonged to the boy who first spoke rudely to Mrs. Wallace Sr. The boy stood up and walked to Nicole's side. He then pushed Vivian's hand that was blocking Nicole and said, I'm sorry, Nicole. I shouldn't have ridiculed you and your grandma. His face was as red as a tomato when he bowed his head and said loudly, I'm really sorry. Nicole knew the type of person he was, so she did not forgive him directly. I'll pass this on to Grandma, she said. The boy's eyes flashed with gratitude at the sound of that. He nodded his head repeatedly as he whispered, thank you, before returning to his seat. His entire being lit up. He was no longer gloomy. After watching that scene unfold, many people looked at each other in dismay. They knew that the whole school had apologized to Nicole. Only a few students from Class B were reluctant to apologize to Nicole. Many did not want to bow their heads, while a few were embarrassed by how they had previously mistreated Nicole. However, the boy's action had set a precedent. Vivian looked at her classmates and was mad. She looked up at Nicole and said, You batch. What kind of sorcery? Enough. Enough. Two voices sounded and interrupted Vivian's words. One sounded cold while the other was disappointed. Vivian did not believe her eyes when she watched Oliver and Gary speak up for Nicole. Oliver looked at Vivian, who was on the verge of tears. His heart reached out for her, but his feelings for her were quickly suppressed after he thought of what she had done. Vivian, stop talking about Nicole. What exactly are you doing every day other than framing, spying, and finding a way to alienate Nicole? How did you become like this? Vivian looked at Oliver and sneered. Did I frame and spy on her? Do you have proof? Oliver, stop shooting your mouth off here. Don't you forget, Nicole has despised all of you who couldn't beat her on the exam. Yet you still trust her and think I'm wrong about her. Oliver frowned. The students of the Royal Creek Institute have always been proud of ourselves. As much as I felt not too happy at hearing what Nicole said, she earned that on her own merit. After all, she won the gold medal in the Math Olympiad competition. Vivian seemed to have read his mind and laughed sarcastically. She looked at Oliver calmly. Didn't you go to the award and see how intimate Mr. Wyants treated Nicole that day? Who would believe there is no hanky-panky going on between them? Even Mr. Ellison, who was always impartial, defended Nicole. Thinking that she was now holding all the cards, Vivian looked back at Nicole with a sinister pride. The thought of Gary scolding her because of Nicole upset her. This was something that he did not even do when she scratched him the other day. I won't allow her to act with impunity again. I'm just doing something good, a favor for our schoolmates. Vivian snickered at the thought of this. Can you prove that the prize you received is real, Nicole? Everyone looked at Nicole suspiciously upon hearing what Vivian had said. As Vivian sounded as if her accusation was justified, all eyes were on Nicole, as people could not tell what actually was going on. Nicole looked up nonchalantly, her gaze sharp as if a glinting blade. You're really asking for trouble here. Aren't you afraid that I will throw you off the building? As she looked at the window on the side, Vivian followed her eyes and shivered in fright. She would never forget the horror of the other day. But now the situation did not allow her to flinch. Vivian gritted her teeth and said brazenly, Nicole, don't be too arrogant just because you can fight. You're at school. Besides, all I'm asking is a factual guess. I dare you to say that you've never cheated. Just then, the school bell rang. Miss Emerson walked in with a stack of test papers. She was stupefied for a second at seeing Nicole and all others stand there. What are you all doing standing here? Return to your seat. We're going to review the test papers of the monthly exam. Vivian looked at Nicole with indignation. Instead of returning to her seat, she looked at Ms. Emerson and asked matter-of-factly, aren't the results out today? Why do we still need to review the exam papers? Ms. Emerson looked at Vivian, her eyes lacking the fondness that she usually had. There is some controversy about who gets first place this time. Mr. Kennedy is looking into it and will probably come over in a moment. What? Isn't Nora from Class A who always holds first place? What controversy is there? Even Vivian froze for a second before continuing to ask, what do you mean, Ms. Emerson? Did someone cheat? She gave a sideways look at Gary as she waited for Ms. Emerson to give an affirmative answer. I knew Nicole cheated on the exam, and no way Gary would like such a person. She did not think Nicole could even do well on the monthly exam. After all, Nicole did not know the test proctor, and Ms. Thompson and Mr. Kennedy must have kept an eye on her. She could not have had the opportunity to cheat. The first place this time is in our class, so Mr. Kennedy has gone to take a look at it. Vivian and even everyone else were stunned upon hearing Ms. Emerson's explanation. How can it be? Nora has always been first in the grade for many years. The person who gets first place is from Class B this year? Who has snatched first place from Nora? Gary's eyes glinted as he looked at Ms. Emerson and Nicole, who stood next to Ms. Emerson, motionless. He had been not too motivated and always been at the bottom of the barrel in exams. But Nora was competitive. She always wanted to get first place. But this time, it was not her. There were whispers around, seemingly discussing the issue. Especially the top few students in the class. They all sat up straight with excitement, expecting to see their names at the top of the result chart, hoping that their efforts would pay off. Thinking of this, people looked at Nicole with scornful eyes. Thinking of what she said and her haughtiness, they felt retribution exacted finally. It's ridiculous. A brazen person from the countryside couldn't have possibly gotten first place. Only a few people thought of the Math Olympiad gold medal that Nicole had just won, and looked worriedly at Nicole. Nicole was expressionless. She checked her watch and figured that she still had enough time. At first, she wanted to check her exam result at Ms. Emerson's office, but since she had to wait a while, she returned to her seat. Ms. Emerson saw Nicole's good manners and was gentle toward her. She then looked sternly at Vivian and said, "What's wrong with you? Don't you know the class has started? What are you waiting for?" Vivian felt wronged and looked at Ms. Emerson with reddening eyes. This time, even Oliver, who had always cared for her, did not look at her or comfort her. She sat back down in her seat, cursing Nicole incessantly in her mind. Even Mr. Kennedy, who had delayed the issuance of the results, became a target of her hatred. Had he not been such a busybody, Nicole's results would have been clear and everyone would have known that Nicole cheated on the Math Olympiad, and that she had a character problem. Vivian told herself not to worry, as Nicole's true face would be exposed in a while. It was recess time, and Mr. Kennedy had still not come over. Ms. Emerson checked her watch and frowned. She wondered what Mr. Kennedy was doing. Nicole had a contemptuous look in her eyes, and after class, she got up to go outside. Just at this moment, the door of Class B suddenly opened with Mr. Kennedy emerging from the inside. He looked not too happy, even annoyed and angry as if someone owed him money. He slapped the result and test papers in his hand on the lectern, and glanced around, and soon, his eyes landed on Nicole. "You! Step out here," he shouted. At first, Nicole was stepping out, but stopped in her tracks upon seeing Mr. Kennedy's attitude. She turned back and sat back down in her seat languidly, as if taking no notice of him. "Mr. Kennedy, if you have something to say, just say it, and don't shout at my students." Ms. Emerson was not too happy with Mr. Kennedy's approach. She frowned and stood unrelenting in front of him. Mr. Kennedy was exasperated, looking at Nicole, and threw the test paper in his hand to the ground. "I would like to know how his student of yours scored full marks in the Math Olympiad competition and the monthly exam. What the hell has she done?" "What?" Everyone knew it was Nicole who won first place in the Math Olympiad competition by having a perfect score. Now she even got a full score on the monthly exam. Everyone else was complaining about how difficult the exam was at the time, not expecting Nicole to get a full score. How did she do that? Almost everyone thought Nicole must have cheated. After all, under normal circumstances, no one could get such a result. They all looked at Nicole with not only a strong sense of jealousy but also disdain in their eyes. "Nicole is first this time," Mr. Kennedy said sarcastically as he looked at the expressions on those people's faces. His heart skipped a beat when his gaze collided with Nicole's indifferent eyes. He would not forget that Nicole and Sebastian knew each other. He was on a collision course with her because he had just seen the results and was worried about losing the bet. While Mr. Kennedy was rooted to the spot, someone stormed in from the outside angrily. "Step out, Nicole." The person seemed to say the same thing as Mr. Kennedy did earlier. Miss Thompson was stepping in on her high heels. Seemingly out of anger, her steps were rapid, and the click-clack of the heels was loud and harsh. She looked at Nicole and yelled, "What the hell did you do to Austin and others? All of them have made it to the top 10 of the grades." "What?" There was an instant uproar. Austin had been notorious for his poor grades. He had gotten into the top 20 with the help of Nicole, and now he went one step further and got into the top 10. How exactly did Nicole do that? Nicole was nonchalant, looking at Mr. Kennedy and Ms. Thompson. One of them had a guilty look on the face while the other one looked furious. A playful smile spread across her face. "Very well, they have come to me, and I didn't have to look for them 1 by 1 inch." When everyone saw Nicole smile, they were captivated, looking at her in a daze. Her smile was obviously cold, but it was also indescribably beautiful. Nicole tapped the table with her fingers, her gaze insouciant. When she looked at Mr. Kennedy and Miss Thompson, her eyes were so cold, as if they could freeze their souls. "Now the results are out, Mr. Kennedy, Miss Thompson." She looked up at the two. "I hope you two will keep your word." Miss Thompson's and Mr. Kennedy's faces collapsed. Miss Thompson was so upset at the thought of those backward students getting into the top 10, and even Sammy was second of the grade. It was she who gave them up to Mr. Lewis at first. Now everyone was praising Mr. Lewis, saying that he was kind-hearted, capable, and that he taught the students well. Thinking about what she had said in front of Mr. Lewis, Miss Thompson was depressed. Harvey in her class was the only student who still occupied the first position, and the rest had slipped. This time, Mr. Lewis's class had the highest overall score, so everyone congratulated him and ignored Miss Thompson. Not only had the performance of her class slipped, she had also done Mr. Lewis a favor with no benefits to herself. And she blamed it all on Nicole. Miss Thompson looked at Nicole with extreme hatred. At first, she thought she would not lose the bet, but the truth was that she had lost. Now she wanted to find out what Nicole had done that enabled Austin and others to raise their scores. Did Nicole steal the exam paper before the exam? Miss Thompson narrowed her eyes and did not bother to look at the useless Mr. Kennedy or care about what he was doing here. She just looked at Nicole coldly. "I will not accept the results. Nicole, you tell me how exactly you got the answer in advance. Did Austin help you? I may cut you some slack if you tell the truth." Mr. Kennedy saw how uncivil Miss Thompson was toward Nicole and gently tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Thompson, Nicole and Mr. Wyance know each other." "She and Mr. Wyance know each other?" "Yeah, right, my family and Mr. Wyance are relatives." A girl with such a low character like her won't even qualify to be his lover. Fret now. Teach her a lesson. Ms. Thompson sneered. Everyone looked curiously at Nicole upon hearing what Miss Thompson said. Is Nicole really having an affair with Mr. Wyance? Emboldened by Miss Thompson, Mr. Kennedy straightened his back and looked at Nicole with brazen eyes. That's right, Nicole. Please explain how you get your results. Vivian looked on with her mouth agape for a while. She then calmed down with a look of schadenfreude on her face. Not just Vivian, but everyone else was looking at Nicole, waiting for her to explain herself. With a stony face, Nicole raised her eyes and looked at Miss Thompson and Mr. Kend with a half-smile. I have nothing to explain, she said in a frosty voice. I have nothing to hide. What makes these people think they could frame her and demand an explanation from her? They have no right to do so. Upon hearing Nicole's reply, Mr. Kennedy and Miss Thompson thought Nicole was acquiescing to it. They both had a sense of delight and self-satisfaction on their faces. Look, I know it. Nicole and Austin have cheated to get such incredible results. Ms. Thompson sneered. Nicole, since you think you have nothing to say, then I will make the decision. I will void your monthly exam results for stealing the test paper. From today onwards, you are no longer a student of this school, but I allow you to stay on probation. If I think you are not doing well, I will send you home straight away. Mr. Kennedy nodded, while Vivian smiled, feeling that the result could not be fairer. Not only Gary was frowning, but even Jack and Wayne found it very hard to stomach. Lulu and June both glared angrily at the teacher. Bradley wanted to stand up, but was pulled back down into his seat by Nicole. Don't move, Nicole said. She did not want her friends to offend Miss Thompson because of her. After all, she did not have to stay at the Royal Creek Institute, but these people had worked so hard to get in here, she did not want them to be targeted by this petty person. Miss Emerson looked at the two in cahoots and retorted, How can you conclude that Nicole and Austin are plagiarists? How did you know they didn't achieve the results by their own merit? What right do you have to judge? Miss Thompson glanced at Miss Emerson with disdain. We gave her a chance, and she acquiesced to cheating. What does that have to do with us? She said in a sinister tone of voice. Mr. Kennedy also nodded his head and said in a threatening voice to Miss Emerson, If you still defend Nicole, you can forget about teaching in his school. Nicole narrowed her sharp eyes at seeing Miss Emerson being bullied. Just at this moment, a mocking voice suddenly came from outside the door. I didn't expect this to be the quality of the teaching staff at the Royal Creek Institute. What an eye-opener. Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy didn't expect to hear someone challenge them. So they immediately looked back at the person walking in. The man was skinny, looking in his 60s, not tall, but energetic, looking very shrewd and valiant. He was wearing an old-fashioned black suit, with a pair of cloth shoes, which had seen better days but were overall clean, and his eyes spoke of wisdom. He was walking in a slow pace and then picked up the test paper that Mr. Kennedy had thrown to the ground. At first, it was just an inadvertent action, but the content of the test paper quickly drew his attention. Miss Thompson looked with disdain at this unassuming old man, who looked with interest at the dirty test paper. Someone with a beggar looks like you are surely not from the Royal Creek Institute. Do you know about the quality of teachers? You'd better get out of here before I call the security, she said coldly. Oh, really? The old man gave a faint reply, but he did not bother to look at her, as he was still obsessed with the test paper. Didn't you say that the Royal Creek Institute welcomes outsiders to come in and become observers? Now it seems that the school just says one thing and does another. Mr. Kennedy sneered. I didn't expect you to be so familiar with the Royal Creek Institute's rules, but those are man-made rules, and I will set a rule today. The Royal Creek Institute is not open to old beggars like you. How dare you mock the teachers here? You'd better leave before I teach you a lesson. He had always been a bastard. When he saw it was just an old man, he became bold. The old man seemed to have finally finished reading the exam paper. He glanced at the name on it, ignored Mr. Kennedy, and looked at Ms. Emerson. Is Nicole a student of yours? Ms. Emerson nodded. Looking at the old man, she felt she seemed to know him but could not recall who he was. But she still replied with respect, Yes, Mr. Nicole is my student. She is outstanding. The old man nodded and looked around with a smile before his eyes stopped on Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy for 2 seconds. Hey, my friend, I'm asking you to bring me to meet Nicole. Why don't you come in? Mr. Kennedy looked at the old man and sneered. I knew you were with Nicole. What a pretentious old man. I wonder who you can ask for help now. You'd better leave, or I will kick you out of here myself. As he spoke, he walked down the stage. This old man taunted me as soon as he walked in. He is on Nicole's side and pretending to be somebody. But I won't be intimidated. But as soon as his voice trailed off, he stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw the person who walked in. As Mr. Kennedy stopped, Miss Thompson became impatient and looked back. Why stop? Deal with Nicole immediately. Kick her out of here. And Mr. Ellison. The man who walked in slowly and stood next to the old man was none other than Mr. Ellison. The always gentle Mr. Ellison had seen what was happening, and his face turned grave. Had he not been here, Mr. Kennedy and Miss Thompson would have successfully framed and kicked Nicole out of the Royal Creek Institute. Their attitude toward Declan clearly showed they were bullies. They treated Declan as a beggar simply because he was old and wanted to kick him out of the classroom when Declan questioned the quality of the teaching staff here. But little did they know Declan was the leading figure of the mathematics faculty at the Northern Institute. Many mathematical geniuses used to be his students. Besides, he was invited to write questions for the Math Olympiad competition this year and author of this year's freshman exam. Declan said he wanted to know about the quality of the Royal Creek Institute students and teachers and study if it could lead to some elite academic and talent exchanges. But such a veteran figure was treated as an old beggar by these two people. Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy exchanged a look, and then she glanced at the grave-faced Mr. Ellison. I didn't know that you had come, Mr. Ellison. Does Mr. Did Ellison really know this old man? Mr. Ellison looked at Miss Thompson. Do you know who he is? He is Professor Declan Hancock of the Northern Institute. What the hell are you two thinking, treating him as a beggar? What? This old man is Professor Declan Hancock. Everyone looked at the skinny old man with their mouth agape. The eyes of many of them were filled with deep admiration. After all, Professor Hancock was a top mathematician in Hustuaberg, and as mathematics students, their life goal was to gain Professor Hancock's approval and aspire to be like him. One student could not help but ask, "Are you really Professor Hancock?" Seeing the expectant look in the students' eyes, Declan smiled and nodded to them, looking friendly. They were all surprised by how approachable Declan was. He looked like a very ordinary old man. No wonder that Mr. Kennedy and Miss Thompson spewed vitriol at him. Miss Thompson's and Mr. Kennedy's faces changed, as they did not expect that this old man who seemingly came out of nowhere turned out to be the famous Professor Hancock. Miss Thompson asked cautiously, "But what are you doing here in our school, Professor Hancock?" Mr. Ellison turned to glance at Nicole and then said coldly to the two of them, "To meet Nicole, who has gotten a full score on the Math Olympiad questions that Professor Hancock has come up with. That explains it now." Mr. Ellison looked at the two, who had suddenly become silent, with an icy look on his face. "What did you just say? I've obstructed you from dealing with Nicole, haven't I?" Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy choked. They looked at the seemingly angry Mr. Ellison and put on a smile. "We just think that, judging by Nicole's past performance, she couldn't have gotten a full score in Professor Hancock's papers, not to mention Austin and a few others who have entered the top 5. Don't forget that their results used to be outrageously poor. Isn't it strange that they can do so well in the exam after just half a month?" Seeing that they were so stubbornly slandering Nicole, a frosty light flashed across Mr. Ellison's eyes. "You have failed to perform as a good teacher, yet couldn't accept it when Austin and others have improved, thinking that they have cheated, unaware how much effort they had put in. People like you don't deserve to become a teacher." Declan nodded in agreement. He did not want to get involved in the internal affair of the Royal Creek Institute. The way Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy spoke to Declan when he came in was enough for Mr. Ellison to see their true faces. Miss Thompson and Mr. Kennedy were so frightened that they were almost tearful. They knew what Mr. Ellison meant. He was going to fire them. In desperation, Miss Thompson turned to Miss Emerson for help. "Please put in a good word for me. You know how much I take care of students. I have just made a minor mistake and don't deserve to be fired. Ms. Emerson looked at the two of them and thought of how many times they had exploited and bullied her. You have no authority to make the school rules or to have people at your mercy. Have you forgotten the time when you stole the Excellent Teacher Award from me? What exactly did my students and I do wrong that you wanted to target us this way? Nicole, she has just gotten good grades and made the school proud, and you two keep smearing her. What about the other people who are in your way? Now it's too late to say you've just made a minor mistake. Mr. Kennedy looked at Ms. Emerson's face, so angry that he could not talk coherently. Nonsense. When did I steal your Excellent Teacher Award? This year's Excellent Teacher Award hasn't yet been announced. Ms. Emerson retorted, saying, Really? Ms. Thompson has gotten the documents ready on the desk and is ready for submission. You must be thrilled with the result that you bribed her to get. Ms. Thompson's and Mr. Kennedy's faces turned pale instantly. They almost did not dare to turn their heads to look at Mr. Ellison's expression behind them. Mr. Kennedy yelled at Ms. Emerson, Don't frame me for this. What you've said is all nonsense. Do you have proof to show that I've bribed Ms. Thompson? Ms. Emerson sneered. Shortly after the start of school, you entered her room with a handful of women's luxury goods. She is now wearing the high heels that you have given her. Everyone was stunned upon hearing that. Mr. Kennedy and Ms. Thompson hardly dared to say anything to refute the accusation. Ms. Thompson's monthly salary as a head of teaching staff was not particularly high, at least not to the point of affording luxury goods. But what she wore every day now had indeed exceeded her income level. It was only possible if she received bribes from her subordinates.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.